This was one of those real side experiences that while you're having it, or on waking, you recognise that you've experienced it before, but had forgotten up until this point. Like how I used to have lots of reoccurring dreams when I was a young child, but then forgot about them as I grew older. Then, with the NUUU song and the process of becoming more aware, I would have all these old forgotten childhood dreams again, but generally with additional detail. Life is always demonstrating to us, as life is always on, regardless of if we have decided to become more aware or not. It's just that generally, when we are immersed with our personal lives, we tend to pay less attention to the subtleties of what's going on around us, and don't tend to give the real side experiences much consideration. Although everyone will be having real side experiences, but until an individual, their real awareness, decides to become more aware, the disconnect between the real awareness and the personal self-immersed awareness is maintained, and the individual will then experience according to their personal self-created consciousness construction, and that extends to the real side also. They rather take their decided personal self-illusion with them, and experience the various agreement and attachment ideas that it consists of. We would refer to this then as more the personal side of the real side. But when the personal self decides to become more aware, as the real awareness decides and motivates the personal self, gets its attention, and nudges it to begin the process of awareness, so the connection is made between the personal self-awareness and the real awareness and the isness reality that the real awareness is a part of, through the NUUU song and the intent to want to proceed with it, as everything is about intent, and the real intent is the real awareness, which is the recognition of the all is. So it's like we are two people, two awarenesses, though really just the same overall awareness. It's just the personal self considers itself to be real, but it is only a tool, a vehicle, for the real awareness to go through its creational process with. So, the personal self connects with the real awareness, decides to become more aware, and this decision then opens up the real side, in that we are deciding to no longer resign our awareness to the personal self only and the illusions that stem from its consciousness. As such, the real guides and life can now feature in our real side experiences, as we are willing to see more than what our created consciousness has been up until that point. And so we receive our guide-created demonstrations that allow us to become more aware, and we can explore the greater parts of creation, other worlds, civilizations, beyond that which we have restricted ourselves by. When it comes to exploring creation, we really are just exploring ourselves, our created selves, as our consciousness affects the simulation we are in, and a consciousness that has contributed to the overall simulator as it stands. So we may well have rather expansive real-side experiences as children, as they tend to be more open before indoctrination locks them into literal one-dimensional rigidity, and then very often we no longer experience as we did as children, especially as we become absorbed into the social literal consciousness. These experiences are still there, as everything is this isness, and so everything is available in every new moment. What the personal self experiences of this everything that's available for its demonstrations and comparisons is what the personal self decides to see, the extent to which it limits itself. And so, with me, when I began to sing the NUUU and make the decision to become more aware, many of these old forgotten child experiences would be revisited, but with additional content. For now I was at a point where I was ready to see more, and so the guides would accommodate, as it is a process, and the guides will show us as much as we can handle, and are ready to see, as they know us better than we know ourselves. They know our personal selves better than we do, in other words, as they have a real awareness discernment of how every created consciousness is constructed, including the subconscious parts. A real awareness we are still striving to fully step into, that we can become fully conscious of the entirety of our created consciousness also, and then through the real awareness we can recognize the is. Evidently the reason I and many others have certain real side experiences as children that could be described as very profound or awareness bolstering indicates the child is setting up to begin the process of awareness in that very lifetime. But as always, there is no guarantee. We are prepared on the real side, we are approached by the guides there, but it must still filter through to the personal self on the physical, and the personal self must not only decide to begin the process, but stick with it, as it is quite the endurance test and journey. And even though we have forgotten these childhood experiences, when reacquainted with them, we either recollect them, as all experiences on the physical and the real side we have had this lifetime are recorded as reference files in our current lifetime memory body, or we recognize them through the real awareness we are connecting with and standing in, as the real awareness has the overview of every experience of not just this lifetime, but every lifetime the personal self has been through in this simulator. So very often experiences on the real side are familiar, but we know for certain we haven't experienced them this lifetime, in which case the familiarity comes from the real awareness. As I said, this real side experience was like this. It wasn't that I had had the experience before during my childhood this lifetime, but more that it was a flashback to another lifetime, dimension, or maybe even another simulator. Wherever or whenever I had experienced it before, it was prior to my finding the new presentation in this lifetime, which makes it all the more intriguing, because it was a continuous series of real-side experiences that spanned a great length of so-called time. So whenever I was receiving these experiences, it would have been so over many months or even years. But here, on the rerun, the entirety of it all was contained in this one real-side experience a year or so ago. As I was saying, the real guides give us the experiences as we are ready to receive them, and so, wherever or whenever this was, back then the guides felt it prudent to drip-feed me the experiences on a nightly basis that spanned many months, suggesting that I had been on this process of awareness at some point before, but had forfeited it for whatever personal reasons and justifications I had. For we all have been on this process at various points in the created simulators, but generally we never see it through. And so here we are with another opportunity in this lifetime and simulator. And as I was saying, as we become more aware, or at a point where we decide the process of awareness again, and we happen to be at a stage where we can better handle what may have been too much previously, as in volume, intensity, and details of the experience, the real guides may very well provide a lot of experience in a very short period, like a quick catch-up course. For as we forfeit the opportunity, we do rather have to start over. Not that our real awareness is diminished, but more that the personal self has to be brought up to speed again, learn to recognize the difference between the simulation and what is real, relearn and understand the literal real references, and re-evaluate all those conscious and mostly subconscious tap lines again. And each time we take up the process again, we will have added more agreement and attachment idea tap lines in the meantime. But having been through the process once before, it's always so that the personal self, once it decides to begin, takes to the process more readily than before, and can be shown more, and in quicker real-side succession and intensity than perhaps it could have handled previously. Seems in this lifetime, wherever it was, I was having weekly sessions or trainings in a kind of treehouse, a delightful setting somewhere that was removed from the physical level place I was in, as though wherever this memory flashback came from, the sessions I was having were indeed on the real side of that lifetime. I was receiving these weekly trainings from a woman, and she was sharing with me all the references that pertain to the ears, about the real universes, how creation works, etc. Very extensive, and as I said, weekly meetings on the real side of this place over a long period of many months and years. While I was having this view, I not only was recognizing that this was not a new experience, that it was a reoccurrence from the long ago past somewhere, but that the woman giving this instruction, despite the gender, my impression was that this was Duane, and as I listened, her voice would change also and become a man's voice, the voice of Duane. Back then, it had always been a woman with a female's voice, but here, during this rerun, it was as though I had the sense and impression that this woman was in fact Duane, and I had further flashbacks of other real side experiences I was having between the weekly real side sessions with this woman in this long ago lifetime. I was doing similar activities as I do in the real side experiences I have now. Lots of adventure-orientated experiences, facing creation and the tap lines of the personal self, the confrontations, etc., an emphasis on training and how to handle myself on the real side through various tricks and abilities, and then lots of continuous interaction with other individuals and sharing with them what I had been taught by this woman in the treehouse, who I now recognized as Duane, and sharing with them the abilities I had learned and the references of the ears. While immersed in this flashback memory experience, I was also fully conscious of how it was a flashback, and so the abilities I had developed and had been very adept at that time were suddenly unavailable to me now. If it had been just a rerunning of the experience, it should have just played out like an old DVD. But because of the realization all this was a memory of a very old experience, that I was conscious of this during the experience, the considerations and personal self-thoughts as to this fascinating situation had my personal self come to the fore more so, rather than it just sitting in the back seat and watching it unfold as it once did wherever and whenever this all happened. Consequently, I struggled a little on this real side past lifetime experience rerun to perform the abilities I had back then been very adept at, as I stepped too much into the personal self, and the personal self is so very limited and very vulnerable, as it is the real awareness that knows just what to do, and does so automatically, and whatever is required according to the circumstances. Like making portals, for example, handling situations with magical abilities, transitioning all over creation, with the personal self watching on rather bewildered, and just observing, etc. And if you step into the personal self too much, you diminish your effectiveness on the real side. You can mess up the portals. You are more vulnerable and unable to defend yourself as effectively, as you disconnect from the real awareness that will handle everything if you keep the personal self out of the way and let the real awareness operate. So it's interesting how from the everything isness of experience in the simulators, you can revisit what would seem to the personal self old, past lifetime, real side experiences. But as is the nature of the is, everything is here and now in this new moment of its reality. Interesting also how the experiences can change according to what you decide in them at the moment you revisit them. That even old experiences from millions of lifetimes ago are not set in stone. And back then, as I would be standing in my real awareness, and so the abilities would naturally come to the fore, so it was that as I revisited the experience, but chose to step into my personal self, so the abilities were lost to me, unavailable, as only through the real awareness could they be accessed and indeed utilized. So my impression was that this was another dimension, maybe a past lifetime, maybe even another simulator, but it was a long time ago. Although here and now, as everything in fact is, in the isness of this nowness new moment. And back then I was receiving real education and references from a real guide, or perhaps at that time and dimension and position in whichever simulator it was in, the individual who was bringing the true reality and making it known in creation, as was my impression. At that time it was a woman, and only when I re-experienced this long ago series of real side experiences would I sense the overlap of Duane and even hear his voice. And during the experience flashback, not only my being conscious of how this was a recollection of a time long ago, caused the personal self to interrupt the rerun due to over-consideration of the situation through the personal self, and make the real awareness abilities inaccessible, but also that the individuals I was sharing these abilities with during this rerun seemed puzzled also, as they saw how I didn't seem to be suddenly so adept at these abilities as I had been moments ago, as though it was a flashback, yes, and an experience from the past, but verified again how we can experience anything, regardless of when it supposedly took place, and what we decide can change what transpired even millions of lifetimes ago, even down to the decided reactions of the other real side experience participants. Confusion they never would have expressed if during this experience revisit I had performed my abilities as I originally did. This rather demonstrated and verified to me also how we can go back into our old references and past lifetime files, and we can alter them, and in theory, if we change the causes, then the effects must change and ripple across the lifetimes and centuries to our current positions and experiences here. Just imagine the possibilities. It's not that we are altering time, as there is no such thing. Time is just cause and effect, and every decision we make creates a new effect and is a simulated reality or dimension all of its own. If we were to time travel, what we are doing is simply entering other dimensions, where the causes to effects were as they were decided in that moment. We might say then that if we enter a dimension where we haven't decided yet on the causes that we have decided in this current dimension, then that dimensional realm would be as though it hadn't advanced as much as this current dimension. If I decided to be a doctor and became so, but then entered a dimension at a point prior to that decision becoming an effect actuality, it might seem that we had gone back in time, but really all that has happened is that we have made different choices and decisions, and as we make our choices, we arrange them in a linear sequence that seems to present as progression and the passage of time, but they are simply choices we are making that spin off into new dimensions. And yes, we generally create in logical steps that would seem to be a progression, but that is simply how we have chosen to cause and effect create. But despite these prior decisions and choices affecting experience, which are other dimensional positions, we still are the culmination of our idea agreements, choices and decisions, and so if you alter another dimensional choice, then the effects must change, and so you would have ripples of altered causality that must affect the consciousness as it is in this current moment and dimension, and as consciousness affects the simulated experience, that too must change. Also, during the flashback experience, I was speaking with an individual I seemed to associate with frequently on the real side back whenever it was. Maybe she was a partner or a close friend, and again I rather confused her as I had the others, where they or she wasn't confused before, as I told her that this seems to be a rerun of real experiences I've had lifetimes before. But for her, this of course was happening in her current moment. This was her present. But for me, it was my past. But really, we both were in the nowness of the isness, and it was just our personal self-considerations of where or when this was. For I surely would not have uttered such things at the time, so again, could these alternative reactions from the participants in this experience have caused ripples of altered effects that have made subtle differences with this woman where she is now, as she now was puzzled and considering and mulling over my words that she hadn't done back when these real side experiences occurred. She was adding a personal mental idea causes that were not in addition to the experience when it happened back whenever, and no doubt she may well have deliberated and focused her attention on this curiosity for a time, intensifying the cause-to-effect ripples of experience alteration. Also, she knew of my weekly trainings and teachings from this female individual in the real side treehouse. who was the new man, or new woman, at that time, and now I was saying to her how not only that this was a flashback, but that now an individual called Duane, who is the current chosen individual, bringing the true reality into creation, but a current chosen individual that wasn't so in her dimension, was speaking through this woman in the treehouse. When sharing this real side experience originally, Duane would say how, due to the multi-dimensional nature of every individual, and how real awareness, real intent, then operates through the multi-dimensional creational realms in beneficial, making sense with life ways, that Duane does indeed feature multi-dimensionally in various forms and positions, and in that particular dimensional view he may well have been in that form, or that it may have been either, and now I was being shown the reality of this through the additional features of this experience rerun, the voice and impression of Duane that was a part of the new woman from that other dimensional realm. For really, we are all this one real awareness isness, and operating the various body forms in creation in the multi-dimensional way that we do. So it's really not so much about the body forms, but the real awareness that animates them. For in this experience, on the real side, I was able to have the view from the perspective of a position in creation where, through what I had decided, presented different circumstances to what I have now, and yet both that experience, that dimensional view, and this dimensional position are all here and now in the nowness of the is. My real awareness, then, is animating all the dimensional created, simulated lifetimes, whenever or wherever they occurred, right now, in this now moment, despite the body forms differing in appearance, or gender, or species. And the real intent of the real awareness, if embraced, may well be making these alterations throughout the simulated, multi-dimensional created lifetimes I've ever lived, and on occasion the personal self will be shown some of this, if it wants to see, can handle it, and not intervene and mess it up, as this experience also demonstrated the potential possibility of such. I would suspect then, only very seldomly will the personal self be shown such experiences where there is potential for alteration, until it can be thoroughly trusted not to interject itself. This real side experience would actually, originally, follow right on the back of the experience I shared on the last Adventures series episode, The Monster in the Supermarket, so would have featured the very same night a year or so ago. In fact, I never got around to sharing this, which was really a continuation of that supermarket rampaging beast experience. It rather got lost amongst all my recorded experiences, but now, as I systematically go through the ones I shared, on the galactic Skypes, so can I share those I accidentally overlooked. What follows was the next scene then, after I had vacated the supermarket, leaving the unaware and unconscious shop occupants with their decided, limited position and the embracing of the fear idea they had chosen to cling onto, as that being a personal self-creation they could relate to. And so, despite the monster of fear clearly apparent to them, representing how many people are at least consciously aware that this world is in a dire situation, they would rather stick with what they knew, their created consciousness and personal self, remaining in the supermarket that represented it, and prefer to sit in a created emotion, that of fear, in light of the apparency of a world rapidly being destroyed. So in the next scene, I was viewing some kind of a scientist, and he was doing some work in the field. He had a little satchel full of papers and documents, an assortment of writing materials spread out across the ground, with little vials and petri dishes that you would collect and contain samples within. I'm uncertain as to his degree of awareness, but he certainly had no knowledge of the references that pertain to the true reality, as were my impressions. He didn't strike me as a mainstream scientist, an individual who would be part of the created scientific official community systems, that, like all systems of the earth, are reptilian created, and serve but one purpose only, that of control, to perpetuate confusion, to keep everyone locked in cause and effect creation through the various ideas such systems promote, that have people agree with and tap-lined accordingly, and with the vast majority's attention and focus on these various systems, be they religious, spiritual, educational, scientific, so agreements are trawled, and unconscious, continuous lifetimes in restricting creation the result for all that do. The reptilians play all sides, and have created cause and effect restricting systems that pretty much would captivate and cater to anybody who is unconscious and unaware of anything beyond creation, from the scientific, through the religious, to the spiritual. They have cast a wide net that encapsulates the entire planet, and so it's rather a case of realizing how everything created, regardless of what it is, if agreed with, represents a cause and effect restriction that is experience that must then be endured, unless the ideas created reference the true reality, and the one presenting them is sincere and real awareness intented, and backed by life and the guides, as any ideas that don't reference creation only, and we are resigned to the effects if we agree with them. For yes, even agreement with ideas that pertain to the true reality, or the creations we decide that promote the guides and the ears, have effects that follow, but the difference being is that of the overall real intent established, that being to ultimately recognize the is, and through the created sharings we do, we earn our awareness required to assume such a recognition. Our creations, that which we decide, then make sense with life, and are awareness beneficial, and as we become more aware through what we share and create, as we learn to recognize to stand more so in our real awareness, as life and the guides take us through our process that facilitates this standing ever more real. This new nowness of the being isness position has us beyond cause and effect, and karma doesn't apply. A means to a recognitional is standing end, where we utilize creation as it was intended, to create and use the references effected as comparisons for is recognition, and we earn our recognition through the utilizing of a creation cause to effect to share and promote the is, which then shares with us our awareness and recognition of it, as everything equals and compensates itself. Whereas those who simply decide and agree with creational referencing ideas only, or those of others, will have to deal with the effects of doing so, as they will not be progressing into greater awareness, as what they are deciding is a perpetuation of the created consciousness distortion. Although all ideas, if we recognize them as what they actually are, created illusions and not real, can be utilized as references and comparisons for what the is not, as the real purpose ultimately is a recognition of the is through the comparison of what it isn't, that which creation overall represents and what it was designed for. But anyway, this scientist was not a part of the mainstream systems, more an alternative scientist, I would say, more a risk-taker, more inclined to want to see and investigate for himself, beyond what the established systems have taught him as to what life is according to the systems. However, the same mutated monster dog of social consciousness agreement was lurking in the area. The scientist seemed to know something was amiss, though perhaps not entirely sure as to the danger he was in, and he seemed rather unprepared for the monster hound. I never saw the beast hound myself, but knew it was there. Seems a scene or two was absent. 1 minute the scientist was there, the next he was gone, all his scientific paraphernalia and equipment scattered about, evidence and signs of a struggle, and drag marks through the grass, suggesting that he had been seized by the dog-beast and dragged off to meet his end. This I took to be an example of an individual waking up to what's going on in the world, starting to investigate, to uncover the truth about how humanity is enslaved to a controlling elite, but an individual who hasn't made the further step of deciding to become more aware. Consequently, despite his knowledge and investigation, he is very much still subconsciously locked into agreements to the rep systems through the programming of his personal self-consciousness, despite learning of what this world really is, and is always open to the effects of what he is subconsciously agreeing with. He is constantly, potentially open to attack, for he has no connection with his real awareness that through a transition into the standing in will afford a greater protection, as the real awareness is the isness reality, that is aside from any cause and effect, that is the only arena where confrontation and attacks can be so. The personal self very much programmed to agreement through fear subconsciously to the controllers, as the collective consciousness has very much been constructed and agreed with overall under the lash of the reptilian controllers, moulded through fear to the design that is preferable for the controllers and what they want to have effected as creational reality, as nothing can be so without agreement, and the reptilians cannot have the overall creation in a design that suits them without the cause and effect agreements to the ideas from the masses that make it so. Such a scientist, as with anyone who isn't aware of anything beyond the personal self, has a programmed personal vehicle that is in agreement to the reptilians' control over him, agreeing that they have a power over him to do what they want. Consequently, if he stays with that personal self-agreement, if his awareness remains locked into the personal self, that is generating experience according to this constructed idea design, then at any time the controllers can potentially feature in his experience and eliminate him, as he has decided and set the stage of his simulated experience, where at any time the villains can enter and impose on him any way they choose, all in accordance with his decided consciousness and simulated reality experience. The controllers may have left him alone if he was just an acquiescent slave, but he was poking his curious nose into their reptilian business, drawing attention to himself, and will undoubtedly be attacked more so, taplined, or even destroyed, as demonstrated in this experience. But even with those who do completely agree with the controllers, their safety can never be so, as this is a human farming planet, and eventually, just like cattle in the slaughter pen, all humans actually are on planet Earth, come will the day when even the most agreeable slave will be killed or eaten. The scientist investigated and was on the trail of the monster that represented agreement control, the fear element that ensures better that agreement is maintained, and he was eliminated for his trouble, killed by the very monster he was investigating, despite maybe not completely understanding its representation, fully understanding how consciousness and creation works. Maybe the controllers even turned the social consciousness on him, discredited him, ridiculed him. The consciousness dog he sought to uncover and understand, turned and killed him, much like how the unaware will fight vehemently to maintain their self-convinced la-la lands and oppose anyone trying to show them how to become more aware and liberate themselves from restricting creation. For those that put forth real information about what's taking place in the world, and a step further with real references to the true reality, will cause agitation for those wanting to cling on to their illusionary comfort zones of the personal self, and anyone upsetting their consideration of how they think life is, especially for those not ready to become aware of more. They will project anger and hostility onto those that are the source of their agitation, because on a level of themselves that they don't recognize, intuitively and real awareness-wise, they will know that what is being presented about what's happening in the world and the real solution, that of the true reality and the recognition of it, is real, but something they are not ready to face. This scientist, though waking up as a first step, did not have the automatic protection through his real intent, real awareness, and that of the guides, as he had not yet moved into the decision to become more aware, and where this protection would become more so. This then is the precarious situation for all who learn about the reptilians and the dark force agendas through the various alternative researchers who provide them this information. People are then set up consequently. They learn the knowledge, draw attention to themselves. They are now on the reptilian radar as a potential troublemaker. They will be hassled more so now and taplined, and until they make the next step to becoming more aware and connecting with the life and the guides through the NUUU song, they are very vulnerable, as they remain with a personal self only that is pre-programmed to potentially always be the recipient of dark force attack through the agreements to control their personal self-consciousness comprises of. And again, the knowledge is one thing, but all the knowledge and information in the world will not get you an inch out of creation, as all the knowledge is just created ideas, and unless there is a reference to the true reality and the real guides, the knowledge can't improve your positioning in life. As the is a reality requiring recognition, aside from all literal ideas of creation, and the more ideas, knowledge, and literal information we immerse ourselves in and cling to, the more we then have to let go of if we ever intend to see the true reality through the illusions of all that we have agreed with and clung to. And with such revelations regarding the dark force agendas will come the created emotional ideas that most will react with, and emotion, like any idea, has effects that further mire us in cause and effect creation, along with the knowledge we cling to, that we charge with the additional emotion we create. We add a potency to the cause and effect idea with the emotion. The dark forces know this, and so they are unconcerned if we learn of their agendas. for we are still locked into subconscious agreements to their control. And with the emotional reactions they excite through the outrageous agendas the masses learn of, so it is that the vast majority are even more so trapping themselves in creation. And even should depopulation take place, this represents no escape for those still locked into controlling agreements. They will be returning into future lifetimes in even worse controlling circumstances, and the dark forces know this also. Interestingly, there were further scenes where groups of more prepared individuals were hunting the hound of social consciousness, sporting guns and heavy armor, perhaps indicating, as the masses become more aware of the controlling agendas, aware more so of how consciousness works, how creation is designed, and how fear-laced agreements are causing the woes of the people of the earth, that they become better equipped to handle what's taking place in their experience, assuming people don't then elect to confront the controllers and engage them in battle, as these would be decided creations that will effect experience that holds people to a creation as readily as any other idea decided and agreed upon. The controllers again delight in the confrontation for this very reason, as this mires the masses into the cause and effect of the ideas that wars, battles, and altercations represent. The next step, of course, being that having recognized what's taking place, to then endeavor to stand ever more so in the real awareness reality that is aside from creation, and to share with others the means to do likewise, so we would not be contesting or battling with the ideas of others, as this has us embroiled in the effects, but rather we just create new positions that make sense with life and awareness, that progressively move us into the recognition of the isness.